screen. There you go. Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 19. And this evening, we're going to be talking about Yemen and Aden in the Middle East in the 1960s. Now, you guys might think, oh, this is an obscure historical topic, and to some degree it is. It's about one of the last British colonial wars, I suppose. But also it's where the Houthis come from, and everyone's heard about the Houthis these days, who fire missiles at all sorts of merchant ships in that part of the world. And of course, if Aden had still been a British colony, that would have been much more difficult. But anyway, we're going to be talking about that, and I'm very happy to say this evening I have our main Middle Eastern expert, Hitman, and also our British politics expert, Aaron Hook, joining me. But as usual, I'm going to start us off with a tune to give people time to join the stream and all this kind of stuff.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wall. Your new God's sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly, bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom, to close have done with childish days. The lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come thou to search our manhood through all of thankless years. No age would give aught wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all of thankless years.
That was, of course, Chris Gard. Go and check him out. He's a good guy down in Australia. He's a dad, and yeah, he's a good bloke. Go and check out his excellent YouTube channel for some really good music. Good evening to my guests, Hitman and Aaron Hook. How are you going, gentlemen?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. This should be a very interesting stream, mind you, because as you mentioned, it's a very lesser known event, but I think an important one that's worth discussing.
100.
Oh, okay.
That's good to hear, gents. Look, this is going to be mostly Hitman's stream because he knows a lot more about the inner workings of what's going on here than I do. Aaron also knows more about the British politics than I do. I was saying before we went live, like my major interests tend to be naval and military history, and I know a bit about politics and I know a bit about the empire and all the rest of it, and the end of the empire, which is kind of what we're talking about this evening. But I'm not the expert on this, so this is mostly going to be Hitman and stream with some politics from Aaron, and I'm just going to add in a few British Army bits, which are quite interesting. And the British Army did extremely well. One of the ironies is that if you look at the winding down of the British Empire that started with the end of World War II and Indian independence, and I wouldn't say quite ended with Aden, but it was one of the last things. What you find is the British Army does really well, but it doesn't do any good because the politicians have already said, no, we're surrendering and running away. And that includes both conservative, in air quotes, and obviously Labour politicians. I mean, the vile Harold Wilson had a great deal to do with this story we're going to tell this evening. But anyway, enough talking from me, and I'm going to hand it over to Hitman. Hitman. One thing I will say, Aden became a British colony in the 1830s. Because it was a strategically important place, particularly in naval terms, because it controls the exit from the Red Sea. And so it was a pretty important place, and it still is, which is why you hear people going on about the Houthis these days. So yeah, with that said, I'm going to hand this over to Hitman. Hitman, take it away, man.
Okay, so for this evening, the event, the formal name of the event is called the Aden Emergency, and it began on the 14th of October 1963 when an Arab nationalist threw a grenade at some British officials at Aden Airport, and then it ends on the 30th of November 1967, where Britain formally withdraws from Aden and the proclamation of the People's Republic of South Yemen, and which, by the way, become the only officially socialist states in the Arab world. So a bit of an outlier there. So how do we get to here? Well, as Anjit mentioned, Britain first becomes in control of Yemen in the 1830s, specifically at 1839. So we take Aden as a port, and then we have because important to understand with Yemen at this time in the 19th and early 20th centuries is the country was divided in two. You have South Yemen, or also known as South Arabia, which was a series of sheikdoms which are nominally under British influence, and then obviously British-controlled Aden. And then North Yemen was known as the Emirate of Yemen, and it was actually a client state of the Ottoman Empire. what happens is obviously after World War One, the Ottoman Empire collapses, and the Emirate of Yemen then becomes the Kingdom of Yemen, and they sort of a nominal British ally, more or less. And in the south, in the 90s, what happens is Britain starts annexing all of these sheikdoms or taking them on as protectorates in the 1920s, and then deciding they want to consolidate all of these territories. In 1937, they create the Federation of South Arabia, which we can see on the map. And so we were thinking, oh, this is a clever idea because we're giving like a rational organization to all of these colonies and territories, but in reality, it was a bit of a
Hitman. I'm correct in saying, am I not, that mostly from the 1920s, the Federation of South Arabia were British protectorates. So they were quasi-independent, but were basically their foreign policy and what have you was run by the Brits. Yeah?
Well, we ran the foreign policy, and obviously we stationed military troops there for their protection. But in all other respects, they were nominally self-governing.
Yes, yeah, that's what I meant. So Aden, if you look on the map, guys, Aden was the actual British colony that was run and ruled by Britain. But all that other sort of orange area was it was a British protectorate. So it wasn't, strictly speaking, British run. What they did internally was entirely their own business. But we as Hitman said, we ran their foreign policy and also had some troops available to help them if they needed it. Sorry, Hitman, carry on, mate.
No, certainly. So this is established in 1937. However, this is a bit dysfunctional because of the political nature of the different units. So Aden itself, it being a major port on the Red Sea, was obviously very mercantile, very commercial. There were lots of wealthy merchants there, and many of these merchants were not Arab. So you have Indians, you have Jews, and you've also had Persians. And obviously, a lot of these, obviously the Indians and the Jews obviously were not Muslim. And that causes tension with the rest of South Arabia because all of these protectorates Britain had brought into the Federation were all little emirates, which means that the territories are run by an imam, which is an Islamic cleric. So obviously there's a very strong theocratic nature to all of these little sheikdoms. And so obviously there's tension between them and Aden because they felt, okay, we see the benefit of British protection, but we don't want to be dominated by all these non-Muslims in Aden. But at the same time,
also, Hitman, I think I'd be correct in saying the population in what on the map is labelled the Federation of South Arabia. That population would have been quite small because it's a desert, mountainous area for the most part. So it doesn't have a big population, whereas Aden, as you said, as a major port, had quite a big population. Would that be correct?
Yes, exactly. I don't have exact numbers to hand, but yes, Aden would have been a very populous centre considering the geography of the area.
Because like all of that area of Arabia, it's pretty barren. It's like desert or semi-desert, and a lot of it is quite mountainous, particularly in Radfan and areas like that. So you're talking about quite small numbers of people, relatively speaking. Yeah.
Yes, and it should be noted that this sort of area of the interior of Yemen and Saudi Arabia is known as the empty quarter because it's that desolate.
Yeah. There's fuck all there, guys. So Aden is like very populous, and as Hitman correctly said, it's full of Indians, Persians, Jewish people, people who are completely alien to the guys who live in the inland areas, who are basically Bedouin Arabs for the most part.
Yes, and as well, there's also the nature of the government. All of these Arab tribesmen are ruled by imams or these Islamic clerics. And it also should be noted that Yemen is predominantly Shia Muslim country, which is an exception because obviously Iran and Iraq are the only other two predominantly Shia countries in the Middle East. So,
which is of course why the Houthis are today supported by the Iranians. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, because they're a militant Shia group.
Yep. 100%.
Okay. Yep. So there's all this tension, and to make things worse, so North Yemen, or the Kingdom of Yemen, has a revolution in 1962, which is sponsored by Arab nationalist officers, which are under the ideological influence of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, who, as we discussed in the previous stream last time we did a history show, Iron Duke, we were talking about the Suez Crisis. And, that was a great humiliation Britain was dealt by Nasser. And this whole emergency is really this. He does it again. This is almost like a second Suez Crisis for us, really.
Yep, totally agree. I'd just say a couple of things here, Hitman. First of all, the humiliation was dealt by the American president mostly. Militarily, we did a stream a couple of weeks ago on Operation Musketeer, which was the British operation to regain control of the Suez Canal, which, by the way, Britain owned most of. And so we were entitled to do so, in my opinion. But the humiliation was not done by Nasser, because Nasser's military forces failed totally. I mean, the Brits were able to duff them up, basically, if I want to not make this a long stream. The Royal Marines and the Parachute Regiment and the Royal Navy and what have you, we were easily able to take over the Suez Canal zone again. That was not a military problem for the Brits. It was the American president, who was Eisenhower at the time, who threatened to destroy the British currency and Anthony Eden, because he was a weak bastard, instead of saying, well, if you really want to destroy your most important ally, go for it, weakly and womanly accepted that and stopped. But, that's only my own view.
Or perhaps maybe more appropriate to say that Nasser obviously was significantly emboldened after Suez, because his popularity skyrocketed in the Arab world. Because so maybe he didn't do the humiliation, but that was how it was perceived within the Arab world, that they saw it as this great strike back against an imperialist power.
No, he hugely weakened Britain's position in the Middle East, and Eisenhower didn't give a shit, because I don't know, the Americans are the Americans, I guess. And I'm not an American. I'm quite fond of many Americans, but I've never much liked their government, I have to say. But so that did indeed happen. And you've got to understand that the British position was hugely weakened after 1956 in the Middle East. And I think that's the main point that Hitman is trying to get across here.
We're very much clinging on by the skin of our teeth.
Yeah. Even though we were supposedly America's most important ally. Supposedly.
No, certainly. Well, it's interesting because obviously around this time, in terms of the political leadership, so obviously the crisis, so obviously that revolution in North Yemen was 1962, and then of course this emergency breaks out the following year. So again, these Arab sort of nationalists were emboldened by this rebellion to the north, which was sponsored by Nasser, and Nasser himself would send soldiers and officers to fight in Yemen with them against us and help train their army. Much good it did them, but yeah. Okay. I was about to say something you may appreciate, Iron Duke, is Nasser did somewhat regret intervening in Yemen, because it did sap a lot of his resources, and he very famously said that this is my Vietnam. So even though he technically won in the end, he felt it was a bit expensive for what he got out of it.
Oh, look, one of the things you have to understand about this campaign, and I'm just talking from a British military point of view here, is that if the Brits were willing to put some soldiers in anywhere in this region on the map, the enemy were defeated. They always were, and they were easily defeated. The biggest battles that Britain had in this campaign were in the Radfan, which you can see kind of like in the middle center of the map. And we lost 4 soldiers killed, 2 of whom had their heads chopped off and then paraded through crater in Aden. But I mean, whatever. It's kind of the risk you run if you're a soldier. But we lost 4 guys killed. The enemy lost hundreds, always, when they got involved in these fights. So it was the Britain withdrawing from Aden had nothing to do with military reality. It had to do with political will and are you going to stay there or not? And as soon as the British government says, well, we're going to withdraw, like initially the British government said, we're going to withdraw, but we're going to keep some troops in Aden. And all right, that's not very good, but it's not the end of the world. But as soon as you say we're going to totally withdraw, well, of course, everyone's going to try and kill you because that's just the way the world runs. But militarily, the British Army could do what it liked in all that area. And anyone who doesn't realize that is an idiot. It wasn't a military defeat. It was a political and moral defeat for the Brits.
Not helped by a certain Harold Wilson, as you've alluded to.
Well, yeah, I detest Harold Wilson with a great detestation, but I don't much like Macmillan, really, because all of these people had just been doing the same thing. Like, if you announce you're going to withdraw, then everyone's going to try and kill you. That's just the way humans work, sadly.
No, exactly. Yeah, so just to set things up a bit more, so in the actual emergency, the 2 main combatants which Nasser is supporting are the NLF, or the National Liberation Front, and FLOSSY, which is the Front for the Liberation of Occupied South Yemen. So in terms of their sort of ideology, so FLOSSY, they are more of a just kind of generic kind of Arab nationalist, sort of Nasserist political movement. However, the NLF are much more radical because they are self-described Marxist-Leninists, so they're outright communists. So there was sort of a bit of conflict between them for ideological purposes, but they more or less kind of work together against stuff, or sort of a united front, so to speak. And so though the emergency would last for 4 years, most of it from 63 till 67 was relatively low intensity. It's only in 67 where things really heat up. And that's largely because you had the 6-Day War in 1967 when Nasser and many coalition of Arab nations decide to launch a preemptive strike on Israel, have the Israelis find out, and then launch their own preemptive counterstrike and humiliate all the Arab neighbors. They occupy Sinai, they occupy the Golan Heights, they occupy the West Bank. Nasser suffers his first real big humiliation as a result of the 6-Day War. However, this actually allows him...
Hitman, let me ask you, what about when Nasser tried to make Egypt and Syria the same country? That was another total failure, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, that's something I did neglect. So in 1958, buoyed off of the success of the aftermath of Suez, he creates with Syria a union state called the United Arab Republic, and that lasts for 3 years, and then the Syrians leave. So yes, that was a setback for him, but I don't think that was that didn't really hurt him as much as the 6-Day War did. The 6-Day War, I think, very much destroyed this aura of invincibility around him. Funny enough, with the United Arab Republic, that was still the formal name of Egypt until 1971. So Egypt was still called the UAR up until after Nasser died. So again, it was very much this pretense to this Arab pan-nationalism. And so the reason the Six-Day War is important is that as there was a great inflammation of Arab nationalist feeling against the West for seeming to be siding with Israel, this is what actually triggers a massive explosion in violence in Yemen. And what actually ends up happening is that the Arab police in Aden actually revolt and mutiny against British rule. And this is where obviously things get much more intense. And Aaron hasn't said much. Is there any sort of political context you want to add to any of this, Aaron? Or
yeah, I just had a bit about sort of colonial policy and also what's going on in the Macmillan government at this point. So, as has been mentioned, the British federated the Federation of South Arabia. This is, in the post-war era, quite a common thing the British government do, and it almost always fails. So they attempt to federate the West Indies colonies. They attempt to federate northern, southern Rhodesia and Nyasaland, and obviously they try to federate Singapore with Malaya. And each time it failed for the same reason as failed with the Federation of Southern Arabia. What most of them are, the majority of those involved in the federation are worried that another party is going to dominate it. So in the Federation of Rhodesias and Nyasaland, there's a great concern that Southern Rhodesia is going to dominate it. In the West Indies, there's a concern that Jamaica will dominate it. And Singapore is deeply worried that it's going to be dominated by Malaya. And so this is a part of a general theme within the British Colonial Office in the 50s and into the early 60s of attempting to federate things and under sort of rationalisation, which never worked. Though that never stopped the British government trying to do it. At the same time, after Suez, the British government, has been mentioned before by both Duke and Hitman, is trying to shore things up in the Middle East. And from sort of 61 onwards, you have a concerted effort by both the British Foreign Office, headed up by Sir Alec Douglas-Hume, by Lord Hume, I should say, at that point, and the Colonial Office and the Commonwealth Relations Office under Duncan Sands to essentially try and evolve, to essentially create
a vile man, Aaron Hook, a vile man who did more. He basically destroyed the British military aircraft industry.
True, yes. Under of course, a method of rationalisation, just like the federations. Yeah. It was a running theme in British politics from the 50s up until essentially the 1970s. That's why you get British Island in the 1960s. It's a rationalisation under Tony Benn. It's this sort of mania that seemed to affect British politics from essentially 45 up until about 75.
I think it's worth mentioning, Aaron, just because this is my thing, the Duncan Sands report on military aviation and defence destroyed the British aircraft industry totally and took it from the second best aviation industry in the world after the Americans to destroy it totally as it is today.
Yeah, there's a very good book on that, which actually somewhere cool. I think it's called The Empire of the Clouds or Empire of the Skies, where it essentially describes that whole situation.
Can I do a shortcut for anyone in the chat? Duncan Sands basically said manned aircraft are dead, and this was in the late 1950s. He said manned aircraft are dead. There's no point in having an aircraft industry anymore. And at this stage, Britain had aircraft like the Hawker Hunter, which was one of the best fighter bombers ever made. The Canberra, which is one of the best photo reconnaissance bombers ever made. We had the Lightning, which was a brilliant interceptor. And of course, the Harrier, which we all know about. And the British aircraft industry no longer makes its own aircraft. And that is largely down to Duncan Sands saying in about 1958, 1959, oh no, manned aircraft are completely out of date, we're not going to use them anymore. And I dare say the Americans were very happy. You know, the Americans actually produced Canberras, which were British bombers, British jet bombers, and was used into the 2000s. The Americans actually made their own version of that because it was such a good aircraft. We all know, I think, that the Americans made their own version of the Harrier because it was such a good aircraft. But Duncan Sands, on his own, really destroyed the British aircraft industry, which was one of the best aircraft industries in the world. You can talk about TSR2 and all sorts of other things. But yeah, a total disaster of a man. And as far as I'm concerned, should have been shot as a traitor. Sorry, guys, I get angry sometimes when I look at recent British history, because our so-called elites are just completely full of traitors who are bad people who don't support anything Britain does.
No, can't disagree.
I should at this point say that I agree with you, Duke, on that. But when he's at the Colonial Office and the Commonwealth Relations Office at this point, he's completely in lockstep with Hume on the fact that they are going to try and shore up and create essentially a third British Empire focused on the Middle East and the Indian Ocean. And so this is one of the reasons why, when you have the coup by the three officers inspired army officers in North Yemen, Hume reacts by starting immediately with the help of a bloke called Neil Billy McLean to support the North Yemeni royalists. And because obviously they see Aden as the integral part of this third British Empire. And so they are determined to shore up what's going on in North Yemen and also obviously fight against the attempt to hold the Aden and the Federation of South Arabia. And as a part of this, you have...
It's not a military problem. It's not a military problem. Britain could do that very easily.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out that it's a military problem that the British are in Aden and the Federation reasonably successfully dealing with. And they're also covertly successfully dealing with it in North Yemen, because one of the things they do is, using Aden as a base, they send mercenaries. And also, interestingly, members of the SAS are allowed to take leave and join these mercenaries and fight in North Yemen. And a lot of ex-SAS men are fighting there under David Stirling.
I get what you're saying, Aaron, but the point I'm trying to make is, right, the Brits can win the Radifan campaign, which is a complete desert and mountainous area, like north of Yemen. You can see it on the map. And lose 4 men dead, which, nobody wants to lose soldiers, but 4 men dead is like really nothing. Okay. So if Britain is going to hang on to Aden, great. And if you turn around and say, all right, we're going to hang on to Aden, then the other stuff, which I'm sure Hitman is going to talk about in a minute, wouldn't happen in the first place. It's the idea that, all right, first of all, the Brits say, we're going to withdraw, but we're going to keep a British brigade in Aden. All right, that is not really ideal. But as soon as the Brits say we're going to totally withdraw, then of course the whole thing becomes a fucking disaster. Because if you're going to withdraw, everyone who's in that area is going to jockey for power. And that should be obvious to like a moron, let alone somebody who is in the British government or the British Colonial Office. This is what I don't understand about British policy in the 60s. if you say you're going to leave, you're fucked. As soon as you say you're going to leave, you're fucked. And that should be obvious to everybody.
I mean, there are other examples. I mean, look at what happened in bloody Palestine. But as soon as we announced we're going to withdraw, the Israelis were even more emboldened to start just, killing whoever they wanted to. So,
yep, 100%, 100% Hitler. This is my only point, all right? I mean, Duncan Sands to me was a wank and a real traitor to the British. And like I said, on his own, he pretty much destroyed the British military aircraft industry, which was bloody good in the 60s and in the 50s. But to me, all of this stuff that goes on in the 60s is insane, because it's like British guys who supposedly are intelligent, like Duncan Sandys, like Macmillan. I mean, I'd leave aside Harold Wilson, because as far as I'm concerned, Harold Wilson was like a complete socialist and probably a Russian agent, but a Soviet agent, I mean. But I just don't get how these people carried on in this utterly childish manner. Because to me it's utterly childish. It's like, oh, we're going to withdraw, but all you guys are going to be good. Why? If we're not there to bash you, why are you going to be good? It's insane to me. It's insane to me, and it is utter lefty liberalism in the sense that, oh, all humans are basically good. No, all humans are not basically good. All humans are basically bad, and you can only make them good by being fairly strict.
Exactly. Just a bit more context regarding withdrawal. As one of the books I reconsulted for this was an excellent book by a guy called James Barr, and it's all looking at the Anglo-American relations in the Middle East in sort of the Cold War and World War II. And essentially, it's important to remember leadership. So obviously, by 1967, obviously Wilson's the prime minister, but the American president by this point was LBJ. And so obviously it's Labour and Democrats. You'd think they would get on like a house on fire, but they don't. They absolutely hate each other, and it's all because LBJ obviously is sailing off to Vietnam, and he wants Britain to get involved like Australia. And Howard Wilson, and I can't believe I'm saying this, to his credit, said, no, we're not going to get involved in Vietnam. Like the one good thing Howard Wilson did the entire time he was prime minister, and was not get involved in Vietnam.
The one thing he did, 100%, it was the only good thing he ever did. And I still am convinced Harold Wilson was basically a Soviet agent, to be honest.
Yeah, that's probably more why he didn't get involved in Vietnam than the fact he wanted to save British lives. So, but anyway,
I didn't think he gave a shit about British lives, but yeah.
Well, just to add to that, because one of the things LBJ now very cynically tried to do to get Britain to commit to Vietnam is that, well, I know we've been against this idea of you having a presence east of Suez, but we kind of want you to still maintain a presence east of Suez now. And Harold Wilson was like, well, fuck you then. I'm just going to withdraw. And so the whole thing is kind of just like a fuck you to LBJ.
Well, like I said, I think Harold Wilson was a Soviet agent. I still think that's why he suddenly retired. I always thought he was a totally evil man. But he was right about not allowing British troops to go to Vietnam, because that war was unwinnable unless you invaded the North, and LBJ was never going to do that.
And also another Wilson, of this idea of him being a Soviet agent, he probably sympathised with the NLF. Oh yeah, small Marxist-Leninists to just take over.
But I think he was a detestable man. I think Callahan was almost as bad, even though he served in the Royal Navy in World War II. Detestable man. Listen, I wouldn't vote Labour if you paid me $1 million, but whatever. I detest the so-called Conservative Party, but I wouldn't vote Labour if you paid me £1 million. Wouldn't happen. Vile people. But yeah, all of the 60s to me, when you look at the late 50s and the 60s to British policy, none of it makes any sense. None of it makes any sense. It just doesn't. We don't support places like Rhodesia, which are the most loyalist places in the entire universe. But we do support assorted African dictators who were evil to their own people. But we support them without the slightest problem. It's weird. It really is weird.
Well, no, it's all just about British Empire was bad, so we have to repudiate it.
Yeah, I never got that. I'm the last empire loyalist. I think the British Empire was an extremely good thing for the world. Always was an extremely good thing for the world. And it was. But, the original position in Aden was that Britain was going to give all of that Federation of South Arabia independence, but keep an infantry brigade in Aden. Now, that would have been bad enough. It would have been, because one infantry brigade's probably not enough to do stuff in that whole area, although anywhere it was sent, it was going to win. But as soon as you say, oh, we're going to leave totally, then obviously the whole thing is going to go to shit. And obviously the whole thing is going to go to shit, because, as we have said several times in this stream already, the population of Aden was not Arabs for the most part. Well, there were loads of Arabs there, but the population of Aden that had influence was Indians and Iranians, like Persians, and Jewish people. Wasn't Arabs. So as soon as you say, okay, we're not even going to control Aden anymore, the whole damn thing is going to go to shit. And to me, that's just obvious. I wouldn't even need to think about it. I would think, well, if we announce that, everything's going to go to shit. But that's what Britain did in the 60s, not just in Aden, but repeatedly.
No, exactly. And well, again, ultimately, it's just spite, really, isn't it?
It's weird. It's weird. I mean, Woodpit is entirely correct about this. I mean, that's what the British Empire did. It always did that. But, I don't know. Hitman, you know way more about this than me, but taking into account the things that the British government announced, how is what happened not entirely predictable?
Oh no, I don't disagree with you. I almost feel it's I think it was the whole withdrawal was deliberate. I mean, we talked about Harold Wilson, but we mustn't forget that obviously Dennis Healey, who was the Defence Secretary, was also heavily involved, because he actually visited Aden during the climax, and there was a meeting between him and Sir Richard Turnbull, who was the High Commissioner of Aden, and Dennis Healey was just saying, "Oh, doesn't look very good here, does it?" Oh great, what a way to throw up morale at Mr. Defence Secretary. And
Crazy.
I shared this quote. I shared this quote before, but it's so excellent. I'm going to share it again, which is Sir Richard Turnbull, the High Commissioner. He says to Dennis Healey, "When the British Empire sank beneath the waves of history, it will leave behind only two monuments. One was the game of association football. The other was the expression, fuck off."
Yeah, indeed.
If I could just add, just to continue what I was saying before, Duke, under the Macmillan government and under Hume, there is a commitment to keep Aden. It's 1964 where things change, when Labour comes in. And one of the big things that Healy does, starting as soon as he becomes Defence Secretary in 1964, is economising British defence spending. And that means effectively starting to withdraw the British military from around the world outside of Western Europe. And so a significant portion of it comes down to the economising, and especially you get that after 67 with the devaluation of the pound. And that's where you get the commitment to East of Suez. Withdrawal of East of Suez outside of a place like Hong Kong, and that's committed to be by 71. And so it's very much the Labour going to power with Wilson, and it is very much Wilson and Healy that do this. You wouldn't necessarily, I don't think you would have gotten this if Gates had lived to become Prime Minister. So it's very much the Wilson and Healy and, to a degree, George, I think it was George Bain was Foreign Secretary at the time, for doing this.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I totally agree.
And don't forget, what's his face? The guy who was Home Secretary.
Roy Jenkins.
Roy Jenkins, yes, that's it.
Yeah, what a lovely man Roy Jenkins was. Yeah, right. Yeah, it was a totally traitorous British government. I mean, not as traitorous as Tony Blair's, maybe, but as traitorous at least. They were vile people who actively moved against British interests all around the world for the whole time they were in power.
And and in terms of the consequences of the withdrawal from Aden, is you obviously had the proclamation of the Republic of South Yemen, which was this the only explicitly Marxist-Leninist state in the Middle East, and then in 1990 both South Yemen and North Yemen unite into one united Yemen. Obviously, that only lasts 24 years, because then you have the civil war in Yemen, which starts in 2014 and is still raging to this day. And again, it's largely this, because here's the problem: you've got these two groups which basically can't get on. You've got these secular Arab nationalists, and then you've got these neo Shia jihadi types, because of the legacy of those imams. And so you've got this complete mess where you've obviously got the Houthis, who are like the jihadis are firing rockets at shipping, and then of course you've got this civil war that's just never ending, and and obviously the Saudis have gotten involved in that as well. And it's just I don't know if we're ever going to see the end of that Yemeni civil war, unless you just like fucking carpet bomb the place.
Well, that's not going to work either, because it's so it's like mountainous desert, and the Americans, the Brits, the French, the Israelis, everyone bombs it, and like it's useless because it's just an enormous mountainous desert region, and you're not going to hit fuck all, basically, no matter how many bombs you land on it.
Why don't we look at the actual some of the actual battles and fighting now then?
Go for it, man. It's yours, but basically it's your stream, mate. You take it in any direction you want.
Okay. So because I mentioned earlier, it started with the grenade at the Aden airport. So that's when
aimed at the British governor. Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and and the NFL and Flossie, they do some nice hostile actions, like more grenade attacks. So they carried out one at RAF Qom Maxar, which was the main RAF base, where they during a children's party and killed a girl and wounding 4 children. So how lovely of them.
Freedom fires, man. Freedom fires. Kill a little girl at her birthday party, for sure.
And so in 1964, the 24th Infantry Brigade arrives to conduct land operations, and it will remain there until the end of the emergency. RAF Qom Maxar Dar is operating 9 squadrons in 1965, and it's got transport units, helicopters. It's got a load of Hawker Hunter fighter bombers, and it's also got a load of rockets as well. Then there's a series of street riots in early January 1967. There's a so in terms of like casualties, so as you said, the British casualties were pretty light. The rebel casualties were much higher, but most of them are in this final year in 67. Then I mentioned there's that police mutiny, and unfortunately on the 20th of June, these Arab mutineers killed 22 British soldiers when they shot down a helicopter. So that was probably, I think, the single biggest load of British casualties during the entire emergency, which is tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, eventually, the local communist rebels managed to take over Crater, which is the main Arab town in Aden. And everyone goes, "Oh my God, this is really bad." But then they send in the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, and this is one British infantry battalion. It's like probably 700 or so dudes, and they managed to retake Crater in one night with no casualties. No casualties at all. They kill quite a few of the enemy, but they don't suffer any casualties.
No, and they're led by Colonel Colin Mitchell, known as Mad Mitch.
Mad Mitch, yeah, absolutely. Who was like one of the last British Empire dudes. He thought, like I do, the British Empire was a good thing, and and his soldiers were imbued with his spirit. And those Scottish soldiers, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, were the old 93rd, the original Thin Red Line. If you read William Howard Russell from the Crimean War, the original Thin Red Line, although originally it was the Thin Red Streak, topped with steel from their bayonets. That was the original 93rd Highlanders, and that was Mad Mitch's battalion. And these guys took over Crater in one night, didn't suffer a single casualty, killed quite a few of the enemy though. But again, by this time, Britain had decided, no, we're leaving.
I will say what's also interesting with this ING, I believe this is actually the last time in history where a pipe major was playing like the bagpipes into battle.
I'm not sure if it was. I have an idea. It might have happened in the Falklands War, but you might be right, Hitman. You might be.
Yeah, because all I know is they definitely had a pipe major playing the pipes when they went in, and obviously how late this was. Yeah, you're right. It might have been Falklands, but we'll have to check that.
Scots Guard. I'm pretty sure the Scots Guards had their pipe major play when the Scots Guards attacked in the Falklands War. So yeah, but this would have been one of the last times for sure. And listen, I'm a Sassenach, but I got a little tiny bit of Scottish ancestry, but I'm basically a Sassenach. But I think bagpipes are great in war. They are. They're a wild, warlike sound, which I think is excellent. But like I said, I'm fairly sure the Scots Guards had their pipers playing when they attacked the Argentines in 1982. I think so.
Well, it's very, very keen.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's good. It's a good way to go to war. But yeah, but this is what is so annoying about everything you watch about Britain in the 1960s and even in the late 1950s, everything we do militarily, it works, but the politicians just won't do what they need to do, which is say, okay, we're staying, we're going to do this, and if you fight us, we'll fucking bash your head. And that's what you have to do if you're running an empire.
And well, what's even worse is after this, Wilson later announces that the government intends to withdraw from the Persian Gulf. And what ends up happening is the withdrawal date is set for 1971. And obviously you have the 1970 election, and obviously good old Ted Heath comes in, and he cucks and it's like, yeah, we're going to honor this. We're going to withdraw, and then we pull out of the Persian Gulf. We pull out of Kuwait and the UAE.
100%. And yet you can go back to the day, of course, and you can find there's a British naval base in the Gulf. You can find British warships have been trying to defend merchant ships, like absolutely sailing quite close to Aden and Yemen. And we've been spending missiles that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, or pounds, I should say, against Houthi drones, which cost a few £1,000s, you know? And the Americans have been doing the same thing. Yes, we can shoot down their drones, but every time we fire a missile to do that, it costs 5 times as much as the drone we're shooting down. And also, at the moment, you cannot reload vertical load missiles on warships. So you have to go back to port to do that. So if you're a British ship with 48 missiles or an American ship with 60 missiles, after you've got towards the end of those, and obviously you have to keep a few in case they fire at you as you're going back to your base, you've got to go back to your base. And every time you fire one of these missiles, you're spending 5 times as much money as the enemy is. That may change in the future. It probably will, but it sure hasn't at the moment. And if there'd still been a big British base at Aden, doubt much of this would have happened, to be honest. So it's kind of like, what happened in the past leads to directly what happens today. And there's no sense in what you say.
No, certainly we all live in some absurd hyper-reality.
I mean, Hitman, I'm going to ask you about this, even though it's not the subject of our stream. Like, nobody knows how good the American strikes on Iran were in terms of actually destroying their nuclear stuff. Not that I think that's that important, given that, the Israelis already have nuclear weapons. So do I care if Iran gets them as well? Probably not. And if I was an Iranian, I'd want them as soon as possible. But we don't know how good those strikes were. And what do we get immediately after this? Oh, there's a ceasefire. There's bullshit going on here. I'm not sure what it is, but there is definitely bullshit going on here.
There's bullshit going on. There's just so much bullshit. I can't work out what the hell's going on.
Same. Yeah, absolutely same. But yeah, my point about this stream would be Britain should have hung on to Aden and should have really kept control of the Federation of South Arabia. And have we done that? we'd have probably had to have done a bit more fighting, but we would have still won because, like I say, biggest British Army operation there cost 4 dead. Well, even the British Army can put up with 4 dead. Sad though that is, but
Well, ultimately, we're looking at the British position in the Middle East. It is a series of reversals and defeats, which each new defeat makes it harder to cling on what we've got left. So, obviously, after Palestine 46-48, that makes holding on to Suez and harder. Then we lose Suez, and then that makes things even harder to hold on in obviously Yemen, and then obviously we withdraw from the Gulf. So it's feels like a bit of a domino effect going on.
Yeah. And at any stage, some, I hesitate to say clever because you don't need to be clever. At any stage, some intelligent British politician has to say, how about we say we're not going to retreat anymore? At which point you can hold what you got. You can. You might have to use some troops, but you can hold it. There was never like a British military defeat in the Gulf or anywhere in the Middle East. There never was. Not one. But we just kept withdrawing, even though we hadn't lost.
No, as you've got that quote from Mitch, there's no war British soldier can't win, but there's no war British politician can't lose. No truer words have ever been spoken.
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. Aaron, anything to say politically and what have you about that?
Yeah, just to add one thing. I mentioned earlier that it was sort of economising and sort of sorting out the finances that was sort of motivation for the Labour government to withdraw east of Suez and Aden places in the Gulf. Well, when that withdrawal takes place in the early 70s, is just when those areas, particularly the Gulf states, are starting to come into their own, and Britain, they wouldn't have been the quote-unquote drain that Healy saw them as. And so the British withdraw just at the point at which those states could have been kept going under British protection for very little cost at all. And so the even the economising argument goes out of the window at that point.
Totally agree. Hitman, I don't know how much more we've got to say about this. It depends on you. But what's your thoughts on this?
Well, again, as I've kind of elaborated, I think this whole situation could have been avoided had we not fucked Suez up. Well, thanks, Eden. But ultimately, I think the situation was still winnable, though obviously losing Suez made it harder. I just think you needed politicians with actual determination to hold on and just not cuck. But again, what's the consistent thing we see? Politicians cuck even once we're militarily successful.
Yep, 100%. John Best is saying, isn't the drones, it's the cruise missiles were the drones. John Best, the point I'm trying to make is it's pretty easy to shoot down drones and cruise missiles. But the warships that Britain and America and everybody else has nowadays, they have to use missiles to shoot down those drones and cruise missiles, which are vastly more expensive. Cruise missiles are more expensive than drones, but they're still far cheaper than the vertical launch missiles on a Royal Navy warship or a USN warship. Far cheaper. Cruise missiles are not that difficult to shoot down. They're called cruise missiles because they cruise. But the weapons you're having to use to shoot them down are vastly more expensive. And also, as I tried to point out earlier, which is very important, is that if you have, say, a Royal Navy destroyer with 48 missile that it carries, or an American destroyer with maybe 60 missiles that it carries, and you may take for your own way of thinking why American ships have more missiles than British ships, and why the British government is a penny pinching government. You may take all those things, and you'd be right. But when you get down to 40 missiles if you're a British ship, or 50 missiles if you're an American ship, you have to withdraw and sail back to your nearest port to get those missiles reloaded. And so it is quite easy to overwhelm an enemy warship with so many drones and cruise missiles, and you could just use drones. Like if you launch 300 drones at one really advanced British or American air defense destroyer, you could overwhelm her. You could. And she, unlike in the past, you used to be able to reload missiles at sea. At the moment, you can't. Now, everyone's trying to work how to do this, but at the moment, you can't. And until you can, warships are going to be vulnerable to that. But, you know, John, I'm just trying to point out to you the truth about this. And my son's in the Royal Navy, so like I kind of take this stuff seriously. But anyway, whatever. Woodpit says US and Britain's combined missile battery, probably by 100 times. Like probably just the Americans by 100 times, and Britain's would be vastly smaller, by the way. But certainly. But the point we're trying to make on this stream is that it's not about the weapons. Like British Army won all its battles in Yemen and around Aden. Every single one didn't have the slightest difficulty ever winning. But the British politicians just said, no, we're dropping. And if you are going to say to your enemies, even though you can easily beat them, we're going to withdraw, well, yeah, of course, they're going to keep slapping you around the face. It's a bit like the mass immigration in Britain at the moment. You know, the British people are far better than the mass immigrants from the third world in Britain today, but the British government supports the immigrants, not the British people. If the British people even tweet something nasty, you get 3 or 4 years in prison, whereas you can rape a little English girl and get less than that. And if you do that sort of thing, the enemy is going to win. I'm sorry, they are.
No, absolutely. Well, on this topic, I've said everything I really wanted to. I mean, it's a pretty minor, lesser-known episode, but an important one that was worth covering. So, it's been great to be able to talk about it.
Well, I'm going to play us a tune in a minute, Hitman, which is a good Scottish tune about the Argyll and Sutherland Islanders. But I just think, they did everything that was required of them. But you know what? By the time they did their stuff, we were already running away. You know? Like the British government, Wilson, the communist bastard, had already said, we're running away. You know? Aaron, anything to say about this, mate, before we close?
I've got nothing else to add now.
Hitman, anything you would like to plug, sir, in terms of your channel and all the rest of it?
Yes, we've been talking about the Middle East. The main thing I'm working on at the moment is a series on modern Iran. The next episode is going to be dropping this Saturday at about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. That's UK time. We'll be discussing the fall of the Zand dynasty and the rise of the Qajars in the late 18th century. So, if interested, give that a watch. Also, I hope to next Tuesday have Mike of Pole and Mellon and another American friend, Jay Ford, on. We're going to be carrying on the delve into millennial culture, which I did with Mellon and Mike of Pole last week, which I've had rave reviews about. So we're carrying that on. So if you're interested in that, give that a watch as well.
I've seen a couple of episodes of Hitman's history of Persia and Iran, and it's pretty good, so I can recommend that. Aaron, would you like to plug your channel, sir?
Yes, my channel is Aaron James Hook, and I announced today that I'm going to be starting a book club in September, which is called the Imperial Pulp Fiction Book Club, which will sort of cover books from late Victorian era up until the 1960s and 70s. And the first book we're going to read, which will be in September, is going to be The Forbidden Territory by Dennis Wheatley.
Well, if you do, if you do King Solomon's Mines or something like that, Aaron, let me know and I'll join that if you do it.
Oh yeah, we've got that. I've got that down for some time next year. Actually, one book that you'll probably want to read, Duke, or I should say reread, is going to be in November. The pick is The Four Feathers by A.W. Mason.
Yeah, I'll do that. I have my issues with that book, but yeah, okay, I'll do that.
Okay.
All right, guys. Pretty depressing stream for the most part. End of the British Empire was pretty depressing, I've got to say. The not for the soldiers. The soldiers always did exactly what they were expected to do, and always won. I mean, this is one of the weird things about this is the British Army always won in the 60s and 70s, wherever they were sent, and the 50s. But the politicians always surrendered. But, you know, they're the modern British elites. Sorry, him.
It's something I'm just going to comment is I've just realised something, that the 3 history streams I've done, obviously we did the first Afghan war, we then did the Suez Crisis, now we've done this. Every single stream I've done as part of your history show has been a British defeat. Hopefully we'll break that streak next time when we do the Oman one, because that one's a bit more positive. You could kind of say that was a victory. So
yes. Yeah, it was also the last time the Brits killed the ruler, pretty much. The ruler of Oman was almost certainly assassinated by the Brits, and his son was put in charge, and then we sent the SAS and the parachute regiment and other good British troops in there and won the war. It's kind of cool, actually, the Oman thing. So yeah, well, hopefully you're right, and when we do that one, we'll do a British victory for once. Next week we're going to do the Crimean War, 1854-1856, as our subject, which I am very grateful for, because it's a campaign I don't need to research because I know a fair amount about it. And we're also on the 12th of July going to do a special stream about the founding of England in the 900s, because that's how old England is. And that's going to be with Aaron Hook and hopefully Mitch, etc. So yeah, we're going to be doing those. Do join us for the Crimean War stream. I know that Mitch, because he speaks Russian, is doing some research on the Russian side of the Crimean War. So that should be pretty interesting for next Wednesday. And And of course, on Saturday UK time or Sunday morning my time, we'll be doing our normal politics and current affairs stream, Splendid Isolation. All right, I'm gonna try and play us out of a tune. Let's see if it works.
In the heat of the sun, houses burned out of hand. You'll see them in a town once a mile, ruled by violence and fire. You'll see them out of the north, the law of the Scot, who decide what is and what is not. 700 Glengarry men heard the cry come ringing down the glen. Never mind the sand, take your rifle in your hand, the Argyles are moving again. Amid sandbags and wire, hit by terrorist fire, you'll see them where the painted and gun and streets scorched by the sun. You'll see them from the town of Greater, you'll hear the cry, you must learn to live in peace or learn to die. 700 Glengarry men heard the cry come ringing down the glen. Never mind the sand, take your rifle in your hand, the Argyles are moving again. To Aden goes our song, from the Arctic to Hong Kong, you'll see them. Amid jungle, hill or town, against yellow, white or brown, you'll see them. For this is but a chapter in our bloody history, fighting for our future and to keep our country free. 700 Glengarry men heard the cry come ringing down the glen. Never mind the sand, take your rifle in your hand, the Argyles are moving. 700 Glengarry men heard the cry come ringing down the glen. Never mind the sand, take your rifle in your hand, the Argyles are moving again.
And that was 700 Glengarry men, which is about the Argyll and Southern Highlanders in Crater in Aden in 1967, and it's a fine Scottish tune. Thank you very, very much to my guests, Hitman and Aaron Hook. Details of their channel will be under the stream in a little while. Come and join us on Saturday for our normal Splendid Isolation, politics and current affairs stream. And never let the bastards grind you down, boys. See you soon.
See you around.